Welcome guys. So the first thing we'll be needing is our scissors, and we'll be using that for cutting. We'll be needing buttons. We'll be needing about 2 or 3 depending on how many back pockets you are making. If you're making 2 back pockets, you should be needing at least 3 buttons. We'll be needing thread, black and also navy blue color, and also white too. In these zips, we'll be needing just one for those zipper, and that's the waistband. It's actually come ready-made like that, but you have to re-sew those sewn edges to make sure it lasts longer. So you sew on those edges again, you sew on the upper edge and you also sew on the lower edge, and you do that for all the waistband you'll be using for the making of your trouser, everything. So that's that. So the next thing is the lining. The lining will be needed to cover our front pocket. It doesn't actually cover the back pocket, it's just mostly for the front pocket. Now this is our trouser length material. Trouser length in the sense that it is 45 inches wide. Now trouser length is actually a yard plus a quarter yard. A yard is 36 inches plus a quarter yard, which is 9 inches. So the addition of both should give you 45 inches, and that is what we will be using to make our trouser. So this tutorial is just to show you how to manage material in context. That's just what it's all about. So if you are not aware of how to cut trouser using the trouser length, you might just enter a trap trying to do it. So that's 36. Then you can just start your measurement from that 36 point again. You see you get an additional 9 inches, which will give you 45 inches in total. So everything is just to explain to you how to manage. So you can use a pattern paper, which you see me using here, or you can just cut directly on your fabric. Anything, the first thing we'll be marking 1.5 inches on the upper line, and this is as a result of the fact that the back waistline of the trouser is actually higher than the front waistline of the trouser. So the back piece is higher than the front piece, and for the fact that we'll start our cutting from the front piece, it is only necessary we make arrangements for the back piece. So we'll mark out our 1.5 inch line with a broken line like that, and that space will be preserved for further working. The next thing will be to mark our trouser length. We will not be marking 38 inches, instead we'll be marking 37 inches. And we're actually doing this because of the waistband. The waistband actually has an effect on the length of the trouser you cut out when you are cutting out your trouser. If your trouser length is 38 as we are working, and your waistband is supposed to be a 1.5 inches high waistband, it is only mandatory you cut out 37 inches. It is just a simple mathematics. The trouser will lose ½ inch to the waist, and the waistband will add 1.5 inches to it. So we also mark 2 inches excess of folding on the down line. Most people do mark 1.5, most people do mark 2.5, depending on the reason for doing that. If you want to add excesses just because you are not sure, you can make it 2.5. So I'll be taking 2 inches mark all through, and that 2 inches mark will be responsible for our sewing allowance. So while cutting, we will not actually take the sewing allowance into cognizance, but the 2 inches mark will actually make an atonement for that. And that 2 inches mark will actually be on the back piece, it will not be on the front piece. So initially I took a 1.5 inches excess upwards, then I also took 2 inches on the side. So what we will be working with will not actually affect the 1.5 inches we took upward, and at the same time will not affect these 2 inches we are taking now, because what will only affect the 1.5 and the 2 inches will be the back piece. So for the front piece, it is the box we are creating inwards that we'll be working with. So after finish making our broken lines for the 2 inches mark, we'll go straight to the making of the front piece, which is the working in the inner box. The first thing we'll do will be to take 10 inches all through from the top, or should I say from our new top line, which is the 1.5 inches mark. So we'll mark our 10 inches and we'll use our ruler to join all points like that, and that will actually be our crotch line. So on the 2 inches mark, on that 2 inches mark, well, let's go to our knee line first. So for the knee line, I'll just mark out the knee line points like that. So after marking out the knee point, that's your waist to your knee. So you mark it, then you join with a line. So for this tutorial, the knee measurement is not actually certain. So I'll be taking the measurements just to be sure I can control the shape I'm creating. So it's more or less an assumption. If you are doing yours, you can actually take your knee measurement. So I took 2 inches on the down line, and that 2 inches will be responsible for the slant nature of our trouser. The trouser is not actually straight, it is slant. Unlike when you're in a short or a knicker, you can actually sew it straight, but for your trouser, it has to be slant from the down line upwards like that. So I'll make a slant line from the ankle line up until the waistline, and I'll bring it down like that. So I'll start taking my horizontal measurements now. So the first measurement I'll take is my ankle measurement, and that is 13. So I'm marking 6.5. Then I'll go 2 inches upward and also mark my 6.5, because the folding has to come up and meet the same 13 inches mark. So after that, I'll go straight to my thigh and I'll take my thigh measurement. My thigh measurement is 23. So I'll be marking 11.5 inches, then an excess of 1 inch forward. So after that, I'll divide that crotch measurement from the waist into 2, which will automatically give us 5 inches. So on that 5 inches mark, I'll be taking my hip measurement. My hip measurement is actually 40. So it is only fact I mark out 10 inches from our slant line. Mind you, all the measurements we are taking is from the slant line. The slant line is actually our new control line. So I'll take my waist measurement, which is divided by 4. I'll add 1 inch, and that 1 inch is responsible for our dart. Then I'll come down by 1/2 inch and I'll join to that line. That's our initial waistline. So I've succeeded in slanting our waist downwards for the front piece, but that same waist will be slanted upwards for the back piece. So I'll join to the hip and I'll also join to the crotch. After that, I'll make a curve to meet our 1 inch excess. Now for our knee line is actually a guess. So it's just a guess. You can actually take your knee measurement and get perfect measurement. So I took my knee measurement just to make sure I have control from my curve, from my waist to my knee, and also from the ankle to the knee. So it helps in controlling how my curve should be. So if you take your knee measurement, you should even get a more perfect shape than what I'm getting now. So any shape that doesn't look straight or that doesn't look like a perfect curve, you straighten out when you are actually making use of straight lines. You know, I mostly use broken lines initially. So when I'm straightening out the lines, I'll actually straighten all those curves like that. So the fact that we don't have our knee measurements will actually be a negative factor, but you can always measure your knee and be sure of what you are doing. So we'll join all our broken lines, and after that we should be able to say we've succeeded in making our front piece. So for the back piece, you mark 2 inches from that slant line all through, from the waist down to the crotch, down to the knee line, and also down to the ankle line, and that will actually be the beginning of the back piece. And that back piece, 2 inches you see me marking out there, is actually responsible for our sewing allowance. Our sewing allowance is 1/2 inch on every side of the pieces. So this is actually a 4-piece cutting. So each will contain half inch, and that will be responsible for this 2-inch gap you see me working on. So for our back piece, the first thing will be to take a 3/4 inch upward from our first line. Then I'll take that measurement like that, take it upwards, and I'll mark. What I mark now actually contains the dart addition which was given for the front piece, so contained in the back piece. Then I'll take 1 inch excess, and that 1 inch is because your bum, that's your butt, is actually bigger than the front, so the excess is created to contain your bum, or should I say your butt, and that's that. So I'll join to that line, and that line will only be used when you are cutting out the back piece. It will not actually come into play when you are cutting the front piece. So for our cutting, we'll start from the back piece. We'll cut out the back piece, and that's from the 2 inches excess line, and also for the 1 inch butt excess on the crotch. So I'll just cut everything all through like that, and after cutting everything, I'll be using this pattern paper to cut out my fabric. So as you can see, my fabric once again is 45 inches. I'm just doing it just to be sure I'm actually still working with the trouser length measurement I promised. So the whole trick here is to know how to place the pattern paper on the fabric to actually be able to manage the 1 inch, trouser length measurement, which is 45 inches. So you just place it any way you want like that. It is actually when you are cutting the front piece that you need to do the trick. So I just place the top on the top like that, and the down part on the down like that. Then I'll be making use of my scissors to cut it out. So I'll cut everything out like that, straightforward, no extra work to be done, just the good old cutting. I'll cut everything to be a replica of what I have on the pattern paper, and that will be that. So after cutting out, I'll remove my pins I use in holding it down, and what I've actually done is succeeding in creating my back piece. Now for the front piece, the first thing will be to reduce the waistline, reduce the butt allowance, and also reduce the 2 inches sewing allowance that was responsible for the creation of the back piece. Now I turned it again upside down, so where was used for the waistline will now be used for the ankle line, and where was used for the ankle line in the cutting of the back piece will now be used for the waistline. Now I'll bring it to the edge. I'm bringing it to the edge of the material. The edge of the material actually has the finished part, and that finished part will be needed when we are creating our pocket, because you need that on the side of the pocket. Then I'll be making use of my pin once again to hold it down. That pin will actually be used to hold the waist part and also the crotch part. So I'll just make sure my pin is holding it down firmly before I start cutting. So the whole trick is just to use where you use for your waistline cutting of the back piece, you use it for your ankle line in the cutting of the front piece, and where you use for the cutting of the ankle of the back piece, you use it for the cutting of the waistline of the front piece. So after being sure of the placing of the pattern paper on the fabric, I'll go straight to the cutting. But before then, I'll take a 7 inches measurement on that finished line of my fabric. Then I'll make a notch. I'll make a notch inwards into the pattern paper by ½ inch. So I make a ½ inch notch into the pattern paper, and that will be responsible for our pockets. That will actually be what will make our pockets to relax perfectly well. You can also make a 3 inches mark on the waistline for the slant of your pocket now, or you can actually wait till when you finish cutting it out to make that 3 inches mark. So what I will now do now is just to finish my cutting from the ankle line to the knee line. So after getting to the knee line, I'll also make my cut to the crotch line. Now every other excesses I'm cutting off will actually be needed for specific purposes. You need that finished edge cutting when you are actually making your back pocket. So what I'm cutting out now, you use creating your back pocket, and the opposite part you see me cutting out initially, you will use when you are creating your waistband. So I actually stop at that 7 inches mark I gave for my front pocket. Then I'll go straight to the cutting of the curve from my waist to my crotch, and the excesses I'll keep because I'll be using it for the pocket cover, belt straps, waistband, and what have you. So I'll keep that, even probably tie down, or what I'll be using in tying the front and the back piece. So when I start working, I'll have all my materials intact. So I finished cutting out the front piece. So like I said, I made a 1/2 inch notch inwards, and that will be responsible for the relaxation of the slant of my pocket. So I'll also make a 3 inches mark for the slant on the waistline. You can make yours 2.5. You can even make yours as small as 2 inches, or you can even go as far as record purposes to make yours as small as 1 or even 1/2 inches, depending on how slant you want yours to be. For this tutorial, we are making use of a 3 inches slant. For the cutting of our lining, we first of all fold the lining into 2, and the finished part of the lining will be the down line of the lining, because you don't want to start whipping again after cutting it out. So I'll just join both, and I'll make sure the lining is 1 inch wider than the fabric. So you can see me now, I'm measuring our pocket. Our pocket will be 15 inches high, so the lining has to be longer than 15 inches. So after doing that, I'll just cut off the edge like that, cut it through from the crotch to the waist. Then I will readjust, or I'll just cut a 1 inch excess on the other side like that. Then I'll cut the top, making sure it is higher than the waist of the trouser. So when I'm sewing, I'll first of all sew the curve part, then I'll adjust and also sew the other part. So after notching our 3 inches mark for our slant line, I'll cut out the interface I'll be using to solidify that slant line. That slant line actually needs to be hard, because when you are sewing it, you don't want ripples. If you don't add interface, you will mostly get ripples. You will not get a perfect result. So you just have to add interface to that part. Make sure there is no malleable property, that it doesn't actually elast. There's no elasticity. So after that, you will notch your interface you add, so it can actually bend. We use a pressing iron to join it and bend it. So you can see what we get after that. So that's that. I'll open it up, and you can see both sides facing each other. So it's not actually easy to open it, because the interface actually have gumming properties. So that's the finished end we're talking about, and that's also the finished end for the other piece like that. So we'll go straight to the making of our pocket. For the making of our pocket, everything we are doing now will actually be vital in the making of our pocket. It will actually be important in making the making process a bit or even more. So for our pockets, we'll be making use of a dimension of 15 by 6.5. Then after that, I will make a curve on the down line. You can make your curve to look however deep you want it to be. So, and that's not all for the pocket. There's also pocket cover. The pocket cover has to be longer than the height of your pocket, and also wider than the slant of your pocket. That's just all the pocket cover entails. So it is longer than your pocket and also wider than the slant of your pocket. Your pocket is actually 7 inches, so your pocket cover is higher than 7 inches, and the slant is 3 inches, and your pocket cover is wider than 3 inches. Your pocket cover is actually the same fabric you use for the making of your trouser. So in making your pocket, what you just do is you place, and each pocket actually work for only one piece of the front piece of your trouser. It doesn't work for the other piece. So you place that pocket on the slant like that. You place it on the finished edge of that pocket like that. You make a top stitch. Then you notch with your scissors to meet the 1/2 inch inwards position of that material like that. And after doing that, you bend to the other side and you make a 1/2 inch stitch like that to hold it down. After making a 1/2 inch stitch, you can see what we got. Next is to work on the finished edge of the trouser. The finished edge is actually important because it doesn't actually need to be whipped. So you place it like that on the pocketing and you sew on the edge like that. So after sewing on the edge, you pick it inwards, upwards like that, separate it from the material, and you sew the downline of the pocket. After sewing the downline, you can see what we got. So we also sewed our finished part. You can also see what we got. So the next thing now will be to bring it outwards back. So on bringing it outwards, you can actually do a top stitch on the edge again if you want, or you can leave it like that. So that's that with the making of the pocket. Now in rounding up the pocket, you have to arrange it carefully. You have to take your time to arrange it as it is now, making sure you get the positions the output is supposed to look like. Then after that, you make sure the pocket inwards too is also straightened. You don't sew on a rough pocket, because if you sew on a rough pocket, it will also come out rough. So what you do is you take your time to arrange everything. After doing that, you sew on the edge of the pocket, on the side, and also on the top. So you sew on the top and also on the side. Then you trim. Trimming the edges, you can see where we got our pocket is finally ready. So we are not going to go to the whipping stage yet. So in case you don't understand what I mean by trimming, I will trim off the other one for you to see. So this is what I mean by trimming. You trim off the excesses of the pocket to follow the straight line of the initial cut of the trouser. So after doing that, you can see the pocket. So the next thing I'll be showing you is how to attach our lining to the pocket. So it's just basically easy. You keep adjusting the excesses inwards until you sew the lining on the edges of the trouser. You sew on that side, adjust, then you also sew on the curved side and also on the top. And that's that.